our agenda together, and then we're going to jump right in. We're going to be going at a bit of a fast clip today because we have lots to get through. And so if you have any questions or you need anything paused or repeated, please just put it in the chat, and Erin will be monitoring the chat, and they'll let me know. So, we're going to do an introduction to my agency, Skagit Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. We're going to do an overview of sexual violence, and then we're going to do a little brief overview of Stop Sexual Violence, the technical package, which is the main framework for our training today. It has all these steps: promote social norms, teach skills for healthy relationships, provide opportunities to empower women and girls, create protective environments, and then supporting victims and survivors. And then we'll have some, questions and time for discussion at the end. So the framework is all the Stop Sexual Violence package, and then we have lots of other research pulled in and strategies pulled in throughout. And just so you know, so you're prepared, after a couple of our sections, I'm going to have us, take a little pause and have a discussion or reflection moment on what it is that we think would be, and it is an inspiring idea or strategy or something that we may want to implement in our own school or our own area, professionally. So there's going to be time for discussion, and then towards the end, there is going to be a few case studies that we're going to do. Because the part of support victims, we're going to get a little bit into supporting disclosures of sexual violence and, holding space for those and best practices, as well as responding, and a little, really brief overview of how like our policies and our responses to disclosures. So that's going to be a part of our last section, supporting victims and survivors, and we'll have some case studies there that we will work through as well. So, of course, Erin mentioned it before. We're going to be talking a little bit, about sexual violence throughout. None of, a lot of it is about prevention, my work. So we're going a little bit upstream, which is wonderful. It's a little bit more lighthearted and proactive. But we, of course, will be talking about sexual violence most in depth during the 4 slides titled Sexual Violence Crash Course at the beginning and during our case studies at the end. And if we're having our own feelings, our own emotions, and our own experiences coming up. Just a reminder that we're not going to be in the most creative or, fruitful learning space. So just take a break and come back as needed. My agency that I work for is based in Skagit County. We have been going since 1997. We're a nonprofit, and we serve victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, child sexual abuse, sex trafficking, elder abuse, and we focus on intimate partner violence, but touch all those areas. A lot of them are interrelated. And then we also provide support to family members and friends and service providers, what we call secondary victims, people who are in supporting roles or who are impacted by violence happening to people in their lives. All of our services are free and confidential. We can provide them over the phone or in person, and we can provide them in person either at our office, which is in Mount Vernon, or we can go to a school. It's we call mobile advocacy. So very often one of our advocates will go and meet with the student, often in a counselor's office with, confidentiality and discretion and privacy planned for, so that that student meeting with an advocate is kept as absolutely private as possible. All of our services are in English and Spanish, and then in other languages through interpretation. And all of our services are available without discrimination. We're available to anyone of any gender, of any sexual orientation, and of any age. And then the only caveat to age is if students are under 13, we still provide services. The only thing is that we need guardian permission. So we just need a guardian to sign that they can work with us. And then once that signature is done, we do not feed information back to the guardian. So confidentiality and privacy is still 100% maintained within the bounds of mandatory reporting. And Um, so I have a little wheel here of all the services that we provide. So advocacy-based counseling is the biggest thing we do. So I'm an advocate, and this is the largest portion of my job, and the two tenets of advocacy-based counseling are safety and empowerment. So, because of the nature of abuse, where someone is like taking control of another person's body, their freedom, their choices, their emotions, all of our work is based on how can, what do you think is best for yourself, and how can we support that? How can we empower that? And then also safety, exploring and planning for safety both physically, of course, and then emotionally, financially, sexually, spiritually, kind of in all aspects. So that's sort of our one agenda is safety, if we had one. Um, Other services we provide are legal advocacy, most often around protection orders. And then we can also do resource connection, like referring out if we're not able to help someone with a more in-depth legal situation. We have a partner with Northwest Justice Project as well as Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And we have a confidential shelter for people who are fleeing intimate partner violence. We provide medical advocacy, especially we respond when anyone presents to a hospital in Skagit County for a sexual assault exam. And then if anyone presents with um, injuries sustained from intimate partner violence and they request an advocate, then we'll respond to that anytime, day or night. We have support groups. We're starting our domestic violence or intimate partner violence support group this coming Tuesday. That will be on a drop-in basis. And then we have cohort sexual assault support groups where it's not on a drop-in basis. We start a, 8 to 12 week support group program with all the same people that go through the whole support group together, and then we take a break, and then we do another support group, and we most often alternate adult youth for our sexual assault support groups. And of course, if there isn't a support group available, we're always available for one-on-one advocacy. And then we have our crisis line that's available 24/7. So that's just our agency and where I'm coming from. I know that, this is open to participants throughout the scope of the ASD. So there are services and agencies in every county under the purview of the ESD who do this kind of work. Sometimes they're dual agencies where they do sexual assault and domestic violence, and sometimes they're split, but there is one in every county. And so you can just do a little bit of research, or you can reach out to us and we can help refer you. So just a couple of little notes before we really jump into the nitty-gritty. Today, my job is to bring you research, ideas, and new strategies, and your job is to reflect, plan, and share about the sexual violence prevention strategies that you can expand or implement within your role. There will be a lot of information I'm bringing you today, so don't try and capture all of it. I would say, prep a notepad or have a little note-taking, a little side note on your computer. Note the key ideas that inspire you, that you think might be feasible at your school or something that you could do within your role, and then actions you'll take. I don't know about you, but when I make a little list, if it's more of a to-do list than like a I'll get to it eventually list, even if the action you're planning on taking is do more research on this, that can be a little bit more productive. Um, and then at the end of today, if you have a couple of minutes to just take your little to-do list and schedule it out into, little time chunks. I know we're all really busy, so if we plan to just do a little bit of research here, talk to my colleague at lunch here, and uh, we can integrate our intentions and what we learned today into our daily role and into our busy schedule. So we will make sure that all of the slides are available to all of our attendees today. If you're watching the recording, you can just ask me for the slides by my email, and then we're going to take a break about halfway through. I haven't noted it on our slideshow. I'm just going to watch the time and take a break when I feel like we probably need a break. We're roughly halfway through. And then, as I said, if you have questions along the way, just pop them in the chat, and Aram or Aaron will let me know that we have a question. I love this little quote here, just to help prepare us for receiving everything we're going to be talking about today. Listening requires a certain surrender, a willingness to sit with what one does not already know. Listening requires us to stretch a little beyond what we know, expect, or want. And I say that because I know we have all of our own expertise and all of our own experience in this area. And I still want this to be a productive learning and growing time. So, our little overview for sexual violence. Sexual violence is considered a public health issue that conservatively is affecting 1 in 2 women, trans, and gender non-binary people, and 1 in 6 men in the United States. And we believe because it impacts all of us, it is our responsibility as individuals who make up organizations and communities to prevent and address. Sexual violence is, of course, a spectrum. And I have this graphic for us here. I'm going to just give a moment for you to take a look at it and absorb some of the information. I'm sure none of it will be, new information, but just to really ground ourselves in what we're talking about and the whole scope of it. Okay, so I really like this graphic. That being said, I think it does underrepresent the sort of root force of sexual violence, which is that it is both a tool and a symptom of like colonialism and capitalism, which is, of course, where our society is built upon. And it's a tool in that, as in any form of violence, it's used to dehumanize, oppress, and degrade. And as a symptom, people in power feel entitled to the bodies and to the mental space and to, all that, other people are. And so that's what we're kind of dealing with, of course. When we're looking at the numbers, it's definitely not a one-to-one, bad apple type of situation. So not new information for any of us, but just helpful to ground us. And in our district, here are some of the numbers. So 20% of high school students have witnessed contact sexual violence, and the following have experienced contact sexual violence: 10% of 8th graders, 15% of 10th graders, and 20% of 12th graders. So those are the students in our community at our schools, the kids that we're seeing every day in and day out. And going back to that spectrum, when I say contact sexual violence, I'm talking about the darker two echelons, physical and severe violence. A couple of things to keep in mind as we're discussing sexual violence. One, it's preventable. That's what we're talking about all today. Protective factors include connectedness, well, include but are not limited to, of course, connectedness, emotional health, academic achievement, and parents who use reasoning to resolve conflict. And then sexual violence risk factors and protective factors are connected to other forms of violence like intimate partner violence, bullying, stalking, suicide, violent behavior, and weapon carrying. And sexual violence can start really early in the lifespan, as we saw with those numbers from the last slide. So just a quick question. What is it that brought you here today? And I know the surface answer is, to, empower to prevent. But what is it? And I'm going to ask you to just think about this for yourself and drop it in the chat. What is it that really had you sign up today? Is it something that you're passionate about? Is it something that you're seeing there's issues at your school? What is the reason why that this is a priority for you and you made time for it today? So I'll have you just put it in the chat and we'll discuss those together. I want to support my students and families as best as I am able. Absolutely. I want to become more powerful in my role for sure. I help to help me continue to find the balance between responding to situations and preventing. Absolutely. So just as we're responding, um, there's a lot of people who are really nervous about getting disclosures of sexual violence, and the most helpful way to prepare is training and experience. And of course, the only way to gain experience is to just keep showing up in a role day in and day out. We will get the experience, sometimes trial by fire, um, and then training. And that's what we're doing today. So we've got this. To help me continue to find the balance between responding to situations and preventing situations. I already read that. Preventing, not just responding. Absolutely. To become more aware of ways to help students experiencing sexual violence and how to help them. Absolutely. I also think it will help to support students better and become more aware of it. Okay. Aaron, will you interrupt me if we get more oh, we got another one. To help school leaders continue to deepen their trauma-informed responses. Amazing, amazing. I love I love work at a leadership level. Okay, so Aram, I'm just gonna have you interrupt me when we if we get more responses, and I'm gonna flip over to some of my additional ideas. You already touched upon lots of them. Because sexual violence is preventable, because sexual violence inhibits learning for sure, because we are already doing the cleanup work. Why not do the prevention work, right? If we are seeing 10 to 15 to 20% of our students, experiencing sexual violence, we are going to be seeing the behaviors that come from those, adverse experiences that they're going through. They're dealing with it as best they can. They're coping with it as best they can. And sometimes, of course, that's going to be showing up in the classroom. And so we are dealing with it, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. Because improving protective factors for sexual violence also improves protective factors for violent behavior, bullying, suicide, dating violence, and more. Okay, so this is the Stop Sexual Violence Technical Package. It was created by the Center for Disease Control, the National Center for Injury Prevention, and Division of Sexual Violence Prevention. Um, the intention is to reduce sexual violence and its consequences. And I love this little quote here. This is not from the technical package. This is one of my personal favorite quotes. Our earliest sexual experiences should not be something we have to get over. And I hate how radical that is. Um, the core set of strategies is intended to achieve and sustain substantial reductions in a specific risk factor or outcome. The outcome, of course, being sexual violence perpetration. And by what means? Through the best available evidence, commitment, cooperation, and leadership from many sectors. So I imagine we have a conglomerate of people from different roles attending today or watching today. Um, and the best available evidence I have down here, all the strategies that are included in this technical package are meta-analyses, systemic reviews, or rigorous studies showing impact on sexual violence victimization, perpetration, or the risk factors. And then the bits that I have added in, to each section, they're all evidence-based. Some of them are based on, smaller studies, but all of them have evidence. Okay, so sexual abuse prevention is not mandatory for schools to engage in. However, if your school chooses to engage in sexual violence prevention, there are a couple of requirements. None of them are going to be surprising or outlandish. The first one is one, we have a policy and procedure for receiving disclosures and responding to sexual abuse. Totally reasonable. Two, all certified staff must receive mandatory reporter training and professional learning on sexual abuse. I would say that's probably something that we're already doing. And then three, provide 30 days notice and an opt-out form to guardians for classroom learning on sexual abuse and prevention workshops. So if you are doing in-classroom workshops and learning in the same way that we would, provide opt-out consent forms, maybe sex ed, then we're going to do that for sexual abuse prevention. And that, is not only to respect the family and have buy-in from our community, but also to support victims and survivors of sexual abuse because they may be in the classroom and they may not want to be in the classroom for that. They may be like, yes, I already know about this. I have lived it. I don't need to talk about it in a group of my peers. Okay, so promoting social norms that protect against violence. I have Lady Gaga here because she has her own whole campaign about kindness and promoting positive social norms. The rationale is that group expectations and beliefs about violence condition new generations to comply. So think like hazing. Hazing used to be massive. We have, seen how violent and sometimes deadly hazing can be, and there has been a huge push to change that, where it is no longer acceptable. It is sometimes completely prohibited or illegal, and we're seeing a lot less harm and fatality from hazing now than we did, say, 20 or 50 years ago. So that has been a really big push. And then rigid ideas of gender are a risk factor for sexual violence and other forms of violence. So some of these approaches we're taking are, kind of looking at gender norms. So there is a social norms campaign put together by the Department of Health. It's about respect. We'll talk a little bit more about that later because that's included in one of our packages coming up. Bystander interventions, these are just two available. There are a lot of ones available, and you may already be doing them at your school. Two of them are bringing in the bystander and green dot, and then mobilizing men and boys. There are two different programs that can really help target to men and boys. One is athletes as leaders, and the other one is coaching boys into men. Both of them are focused on athletics. Both of them utilize the mentor, like the natural mentor relationship of a coach, and the social cohesion and pull of a whole team to make change at school, like cultural change at a school. We'll talk a little bit more about athletes as leaders later, and coaching boys into men is, is made by the same creators. So we're going to talk again a little bit more about that later. Um, and then two other ones, not so much like whole programs, like on the left side. These ones are just choices that we can make and ways that leadership and teachers can help support, promoting these social norms. Abolishing dress codes. Because a lot of dress codes do align with rape culture and are unfairly enforced upon women, curvier people, people of color, and gender nonconforming or trans students, and putting sort of the blame of sexual violence a little bit on the victim and saying the way that you dress is a problem and over sexualizing students. So abolishing dress codes is something that is recommended by a lot of these different sexual violence packages. And then respecting trans and non-binary people. I put NB people, that's just, a cute, fast, much more concise way of saying non-binary people. And we can do that by using chosen names and pronouns and having identity matched facilities and programs so students can choose based on their identity which bathrooms and which, sports teams they want to be on. That's kind of the idea. Okay, so I'm just going to have you take a moment with your notepad, and if you haven't already, note a couple of approaches um, that inspire you, anything that you would add, and then anything that you is already happening at your school that maybe could um, is either working or could be improved upon or grown. So we'll just take 1 minute to do a little reflection and planning. Okay, so we're moving on to our next section, teaching skills to prevent sexual violence. So there are different categories here, different approaches we can take. One is social emotional learning, which is something that a lot of schools are putting a lot of effort in and have been for several years now. I was just at a school yesterday, and the first 20 minutes of every morning was dedicated to social emotional learning. I've also seen a lot of really amazing classrooms where they have a morning meeting for 20 minutes every morning where they reinforce, um, classroom structures. They have time for students to express themselves, play games, bond, those kinds of things, and infusing social emotional learning into every part of our day. Um, but also, setting aside a little bit of structured time for that. There's a program called Second Step Student Success Through Prevention. And this program, it's prevention of many different things. As you see here, the evidence for this one is that there's a 39% of sexual violence, a reduction of 39% of sexual violence incidents, and a 56% reduction in homophobic teasing. Um, and then just so you know, so you're not like scribbling these down, on the next slide, I have QR codes for a lot of these since this is a pretty dense slide. And then all of them are also linked at the end, in our resources page. I'm going to be doing that quite a bit throughout our workshop, is having a little QR code if you're wanting to just save it for later, if this is something that really inspires you and you want to just pull it up on your phone to do a little bit of reading and professional, development later. And then if you ever want to just come back to it, you can look through the resources at the end, and there will also be a clickable link if you're on a desktop. Okay, moving on to our next category, sexual health and education. So, comprehensive sex education that addresses sexual communication, sexual respect, and consent. Of course, that would impact sexual violence numbers. And there are a couple of programs that do this. Planned Parenthood, of course, we're probably familiar with that if we're not already having our own like in-house sexual health and education programs. So Planned Parenthood is amazing. And then Homeland Security offers free youth workshops for um, online victimization and online perpetration. So they do a lot of training to keep students safe because online is such a can be a dangerous place where students can be victimized, as well as, of course, in the physical world. So those are two resources for that. And then teaching relationship skills. That's something that some classrooms work on, some classrooms don't. Um, that's the biggest thing, part of my job as an education and prevention coordinator. For example, when I say I was in a school yesterday, it was a fifth grade class. I hit all of the health classes for their fifth graders, and we talked about boundaries. So we could be working on communication, conflict resolution, as well as expectations for caring, respectful, nonviolent behavior. So we have a whole curriculum that we can go through, and schools can reach out to us anytime and schedule for us to visit and do workshops. For middle school, a lot of time we do ones on sexual harassment or harassment, boundaries, and then, different aspects of healthy relationships, depending on what you're seeing at your school and what you think would be most helpful to your students. And then for high school, we do all of those things, and we also cover consent if classrooms are wanting that as well to supplement their sexual health and education programs. And then finally, we have modeling healthy relationships. Like as staff, are we modeling healthy ways of dealing with anger, dealing with stress? Are we having mutual respect showed in our classrooms? So a couple of ideas for this. One is this Respect in Schools training that I'm going to be doing on March 11th through the ESD, so you can just keep your eyes out for that. Um, and that one is going to be focused on practicing intervening when we see when we see unhealthy behaviors, but especially if we're hearing attitudes and beliefs about relationships that we think are very toxic or unhealthy and have just been consumed by these young people. How can we intervene, ask questions in a way that maybe changes the way that students are thinking or challenges their beliefs. But at the very least shows that like, we do not agree and that we're not aligned with that belief or attitude. And then also considering integrating healthy relationship guidance into your role. So whatever your role is, there is a touch point with healthy relationships. So what could that be? How could we explore that? So it's going to be very much a, a workshop on reflection on your own role in the school. And then the other one um, is just a program that I went through. It's called Positive Discipline in the Classroom. Unlike the other ones that are here, this one is not free, but it is extremely powerful. The intention is to create kind and firm classroom management and school culture. Um, I can talk a lot bit more about that, but here are the QR codes for each of those. So for the programs, you can either, read more about it. And then for the middle two columns, those QR codes are just contact links so that you can reach out if you would like to request a presentation from one of these agencies. And then I'm going to move forward. And as a reminder, the links will be available, or the slides will be available to you. They'll be sent out after this session. Okay, so there's some curriculum if you're not looking to have outsiders, coming in, if you're just looking at improving your in-house curriculum. Here are a couple that are amazing. One on the top here is Safe Dates. That's for grades 8 to 12. It's focused on teen relationship abuse prevention, and the little blurb on it is that there's significantly less physical and sexual dating abuse 4 years after the program. That one I would say is really, really highly um, thought of in the prevention community. It's very effective and it has some of the best evidence within this field of work. So that one's for more like the realm of high school. And it can be taught by your teacher, by a counselor. It could be taught by me if you would like an outsider coming in, but it's a wonderful program and it just, walks the facilitator through, giving that to any classroom. And then Flash is for middle and high schoolers. It's a sexual health education curriculum that just happens to have really amazing focus on consent and sexual violence reduction. So 85% reported that they are more likely to tell a partner when they don't want to have sex, and significant long-term reduction in homophobic and transphobic beliefs. And then for middle schooler, the fourth R is for grades 7 to 9. It's focused on healthy relationship strategies. And there are, for students who went through it, there are delays in sexual activity, decreased bullying perpetration, reduced acceptance of pro-violence beliefs, and gender stereotypes. So those are just a couple amazing programs that your school can adopt. And there are so many more, of course. And then family involvement. This is the last part of teaching skills to prevent sexual violence. So, according to the CDC and ACD, whole child, whole school, and whole community approach is the most effective prevention practice. So, we suggest that guardians have the opportunity to learn how to recognize grooming, talk to the child about sexual abuse. So, here are a couple of ideas that, are we doing it? Could we improve it? Probably a little bit of both. So, the first one is training and educational nights. So, having an educational night for your guardians on recognizing grooming, for sure, on how to talk to your child about sexual abuse. The next one is discussing social norms, or excuse me, school norms and values at parent-teacher conferences. And, the intention is not only to let guardians know, like, this is what we're building at school, this is the culture we're trying to foster at school, but also, bringing them in so that they can be supporting that, those norms and values at home, and continuing the work so that the student has continuity as they go from school to home. Providing books to read to their children on these topics for sure. There are amazing books from like for very young kids all the way up on like bodily autonomy and consent and safety and those kinds of things. So considering getting some into your library and then offering them to parents if they'd like to bring them home and read them to their children. Sending home abuse prevention materials that they can read on their own time, and then choosing curriculum that includes collaborative homework assignments. So there's a program that I run here called Love Notes, and that one has a major component, which is identifying really early on in the curriculum who is someone that you could talk to about relationships, that you do feel comfortable sharing with, identifying that person. And then after most of the modules, there's a little homework assignment that's like share, what you were learning about, or, talk to this a trusted adult about what their experience with this topic is. And so you're sort of building that connection and that relationship with that trusted adult, and also creating this open conversation where if that student were to experience sexual violence, they would be much more likely to have, feel comfortable and open to talking to someone about it because they already have that two-way communication for learning, disclosure, and, just bonding. Remember, connectedness is one of those um, protective factors for sexual violence. Okay, so of all of that we just talked about, we're going to take another little moment. I'm sure you're taking notes as you went, but just taking a moment to look at what approaches do you think would be feasible? What would you add, if anything? Um, and what new opportunities do you think would be worth the investment? I know that there is a lot of restriction on time, energy, and money. So what do you think would be feasible at your school, even if it took a couple years? So we'll just take 1 minute for reflection and planning, and also just a little break, a little bit of quiet. Okay, so a lot of information. That's why I want to provide these opportunities for quiet and reflection. Um, because as you can already see, you're not going to be able to tackle everything, of course. So just picking and choosing, what do you think, um, what do you think you could have an impact upon at your school, or what ideas you'd like to share with leadership at your school or colleagues? Okay, moving forward. Um, I wanted to open it up if anyone would like to share a couple of the notes that they've been taking down, things that you would like to be working on, or ones that inspire you. So for this one, if you would like, you can either put it in the chat, but the invitation is to come off mute and share some of the one opportunities that you think would be worth the investment or that inspire you. Is there anyone who'd like to share?
I'll just share. I know for me and my district, I'd really like to expand into like the family night, parent education. Like that's definitely an area for growth and certainly worth the investment.
Thank you for sharing. And just for anyone who's has their camera turned off, if you want to share, you don't have to turn your camera on. You can just go off of mute. Okay, so we also have someone writing in the chat that elementary school second step is a good program. Wonderful. Okay. Well, I will just move us on forward. There will be one more chance to throw your ideas out there and let other attendees know what you're working on, what inspires you a little bit later on. So we will come back. Okay, so next section is providing opportunities for women and girls. So a couple of one idea is creating student empowerment groups. I know that there are schools that really foster these. Um, and they can look like, whatever the focus of your student empowerment group, it doesn't matter too much. The idea is to just give students leadership opportunities, chances to have a staff mentor, who's supporting their goals and their ideas, and support through that. So in since I'm in Skagit County, we have one example is the concrete prevention posse out in out upriver. So this is from their their Facebook page. It says, "Hello, we're the club at Concrete Middle and High School dedicated to bettering our school and community. We also promote healthy choices and students living drug, alcohol, and vape-free lives." Um, and then we have Athletes as Leaders as another student empowerment program, and it's also a whole curriculum that you can go through. This is one of the ones that I mentioned earlier that's focused on athletics, particularly. It empowers coaches to give these like very short SEL lessons, about 20 minutes, 12 of them throughout their athletic season to their team, and empower the team to embody a lot of these values and creating a like culture not only on the team level but on the school level. So I have a little video here that helps kind of go through it and gives testimonials from athletes who have gone through it. And I will say, Athletes as Leaders is no longer a girls only program. It's completely opened up and changed to be open to co-ed, as well as boys sports teams. It was originally created for girls sports as a alternative to coaching boys into men, which, as I said, was put together by the same creators. Coaching boys into men is still available as a gender specific program if you do really want to target men and boys in particular. That's an amazing program. And then Athletes as Leaders is for any team that is of any gender. Um, and the other thing I want to say about that is that we ran a training for coaches to get them ready to give this program to their teams this fall, and I believe we're going to continue doing that. It's a collaboration between our agency and the ESD, and then the Washington Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and Athletes as Leaders as their own program. So you can be looking out. We don't have a date for the next time that we're going to be preparing coaches for that, but there will be more trainings available in coming seasons. And if you are not a coach, but you're passionate about this and you want to team up with the coach, or, your coach is like, yes, I'd love to have this run at our, but I just don't have the time, or I don't have the courage, I don't feel like I'm the right person to give it. A counselor or another staff member can give this little can run the program with the support of their coach or their athletic mentors at their school. Okay, so I'm going to just run the video for us to learn a little bit more.
and think like that they're a role model that you can follow. I don't know, high school is definitely a time where you become like more self-conscious and aware of yourself with everything you're doing. There's no better time to learn about these things than right now because it's kind of when you need it the most. Sessions are really intimate experience. I think for the team, it's a great bonding experience for everyone. We're down in the theater room having just a long conversation about things that happen, in everyday life and things that are difficult to talk about in other situations. That it makes it a really beautiful space. We talk about how relationships should be and what respect looks like. A few weeks ago, we were talking about consent and inequalities. What I took away the most was that there are other people who care about this too. Gets that conversation going. A lot of the things that I learned from it had to do with when a relationship is in a healthy relationship. It really like let me express how I'm feeling and it let me be who I wanted to be in there. And so when we leave, we just feel like a better person. We feel more confident in our game. You can expect to like learn a lot about your team and other people and kind of step into other people's shoes and think from their perspective. The more you participate and the more like you actually try to learn from it, the more you'll actually get from it. There are tons of valuable aspects to learn and like more bonded, more of a community.
Okay, so I have a little sample lesson up here. This is just a little piece of it. It's the cool down. So this is as an example of the kind of work that's done. Here, this is a discussion that you can have as you pass the ball around your team. What are some of the things you can do when you hear someone shaming or spreading rumors about someone's personal life? And then there's a brainstorm. What if sexual rumors or name calling were being spread on social media instead of in person? What could you do to help in this situation? And the last question, what can we do to support survivors of sexual assault? So really empowering these students to be leaders and change makers in their school, as well as just think critically about their own actions and their own beliefs. This is a really powerful program. Okay, so these are some economic supports for women and families that schools can provide. And I do see lots of schools working very hard at these ones. So just look for ones that maybe are opportunities for growth at your school that you're not currently doing, or give yourself a pat on the back if you already are. Universal school meals, backpacks and school supplies and clothing, fee-free participation in after school programs and theater, sports, those kinds of things if possible, before and after school care on a sliding scale, on-site or partnered childcare, healthy Title IX protections, flexibility and support with pregnant and parenting students, family liaisons, the school being a gateway to public benefits and community resources, financial education nights for parents and guardians, as well as for students, of course, and then mental health care being provided. So these are some of the ways that we can promote, that we can support women and families. I'm going to keep moving. I'm hoping that you're taking notes as you go. Um, the next section is creating protective environments. Fostering an environment where all violence is unwelcome through physical changes, social and cultural initiatives, and policy updates. So this is a really big section. Students are able to learn and strive for their goals because they feel safe and supported. And staff work in a healthy workplace climate where they too feel safe and supported. So these are the goals. We're going to break down this intention into smaller sections. This is what we're hoping for as staff of schools and as employees of school districts. This is what we're hoping for. Living wages and strong benefits, flexible leave policies, reasonable coverage policies, in terms of substitute teachers, career pathways and upskilling. So we're able to learn and grow and, take on new leadership and roles. Accommodations, protected planning time. So we're not expected to be doing work outside of work. Consistent follow through on policies and concerns. Non-retaliatory feedback systems. Transparent decision making. Shared leadership, such as collaborative problem solving time across staff or a staff advisory council, and trauma informed supervision. I wish I could say more about all of these. They're all amazing and they're all sort of what we hope for in our workplace, as well as many more. But this is something that definitely is going to be affecting our students as well, and is going to be setting a precedent for the whole culture of this school and is worth investment to the best of our abilities within the constraints that we have. Green space. So, I don't have it linked here, but there was a study about the correlation between violence in neighborhoods and green space in neighborhoods. So it's worth, considering what kind of physical environment are we creating for students to be coming into. There's a report on creating a welcoming school environment for students who have experienced trauma or are currently experiencing trauma. And some of the things include having green spaces. So, we're propagating our little plants, having quiet areas, having sound absorbing fabrics such as carpets, rugs, draperies, pillows, those kinds of things. Minimizing loud noise. So, like I said, having really strong structures within our classrooms that allow for, quiet time so there isn't constant chaos in our classroom, including mutual respect showed between teachers and students so that students are, feel compelled to respect the teacher back. That could look like, working on developing individual relationships with our students and getting to know them, investing in them, as well as having roles for students to do and tasks, maybe having, a little portion of our classroom dedicated to building structures, like we're practicing. For example, there's a classroom that I go into, and at the end of every single day, all of the students work to pick up all the garbage on the floor, and the team that picks up the most garbage gets a little incentive, right? So that's a classroom structure that we could be putting in place to have a cleaner, more cohesive environment that's welcoming to students who maybe have a bit of a chaotic home life or things going on outside of school that are draining on their, that are really draining for them. So that school is a restorative and replenishing place to be, and they enjoy being there. And then minimizing loud noises, like using whistles in our classrooms, and then giving students a heads up when there are going to be loud noises like fire drills so that they can emotionally prepare for that. Okay, increasing school connectedness. So of course, as I said, connectedness is one of our protective factors. Implementing programs that focus on social emotional learning. We already talked about that. Promoting supportive youth-adult relationships. So in one of our pictures here, we have a little gaming group. So there's another one that's clearly an outdoor program. What kinds of, community members can we bring in to be mentors and be just extra supportive people in students' lives in collaboration with our school so that students are, having mentors, having new experiences that they maybe otherwise wouldn't get to have. And of course, they're also going to be bonding with other students at that time. Creating and sustaining community connection opportunities for youth and encouraging joy and bonding between youth. So, just now is not the time for laughing and joking and messing around with your friend, but the last 5 minutes of class, because, I get that you guys want to talk, you have so much that you want to catch up on. We're going to create a little bit of time in our day to, have a little bit of quiet time or hang out with our friends or whatever. So just building in time and allowing for time for kids to enjoy themselves and bond with each other, because that will, of course, help them want to come to school. Okay, I would be remiss if I didn't mention protective and compensatory experiences, which is the antithesis of adverse childhood experiences. Of course, you kind of see the correlation in the name. So these are experiences and factors that help counteract adverse childhood experiences and build resiliency. Having a best friend, having a trusted mentor outside the family, being part of a social group, volunteering, having fairly administered roles and routines, having opportunities to learn, being physically active, developing skills and hobbies. Is there anything on this list that you could have an impact on or you could help promote at your school or within your role? Okay. So we're going to just talk about policy briefly. I have here a character who's going to share a lot of the sentiments that I hear when I go to schools that touch upon policy in different ways. So, starting from the left and working right, this character or this student is saying, I know the sexual harassment policy and I know how to report it. I hear that very often. Our sexual harassment policies, are they easy to find and are they easy to understand? A lot of students know where they are, but maybe not like fully understanding the jargon involved in policy. Um, Next, she's saying, but my friend reported and nothing happened. So are our policies effective? Next, she's saying, my counselor never has time, so I don't talk to them. So at this point, we're talking about what is the likelihood of disclosure and the policy being effective in that way. So that's not always something we have. I know that the student's counselor is just someone who has a lot of people on their caseload. So how can we as a school have more mentor positions, perhaps more counselors, just more people that students would be likely to have a bond with to begin with. Um, Next, she's saying, we learned about consent and boundaries in health class today. So this school has a prevention policy or it is working towards prevention, whether it's policy or not. Some schools have policies and some schools just have a teacher or a counselor who is championing sexual violence prevention and is reaching out on their own and making time within their class to have these topics covered. And then disclosure policy. So on the right, unfortunately, this is something that I've heard several times. I told my teacher what happened. They called the police and my family. I never should have said anything. So not students not understanding mandatory reporting or mandatory reporting really being more harmful than protective when it is put in place in a way that's not victim-centered or trauma-informed. And we're going to be talking more about that at the end when we're talking about supporting victims and survivors. So in order to get a good understanding of how your policy is working, we can look at our healthy youth surveys. We can look at the prevalence of different types of harassment, attitude towards harassment from this, like the student's attitude towards harassment, their awareness of reporting and supportive measures that are available, and their perceptions of the effectiveness of those responses. So we can be getting a little bit of an understanding and a window into how how is our policy working? Is it being effective? Okay, so this is a strategy that was put together by the Office of Superintendents of Public Instruction, and it's on sexual violence prevention. So this is a very new program. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. It has different ways that it tackles this subject. So we're going to go through it together. This program is called the Youth-Centered Environmental Shift Program. So it is doing the thing that we love to see in prevention and is the most effective, which is getting the information from youth and having youth champion change and, culture, norm changing. So the first thing, and I would say if you're going to be doing anything in the world of sexual violence prevention, I would say this is a wonderful first step to take, or something that I would highly recommend, putting together a school support team. This is a group that helps guide sexual violence prevention efforts, helps review, revise, and develop protocols, and is involved. It can be made up of people in different roles at the school and involves students and parents. So this is basically just a little planning group for sexual violence prevention. So it's not just one person, and it can have a much bigger impact, as well as the capacity to look at protocol, policy, those kinds of things, since it's more than one person. So some of the things that they are offering or suggesting in this program, and can also provide technical support with, is one, the It's About Respect norms campaign that I mentioned earlier. So the norms campaign is made up of posters and videos that are shown to students on a regular basis. On the left is one of the examples of posters. It says, what goes into getting a really good picture of somebody? Permission, respect, and other people's privacy. It's about respect. Okay, so that's one of the norms campaigns that you can go about. And then another program that they offer is hotspot mapping. So they offer, it's a web app that is now available, I think, on students' Chromebooks. And for a limited time, they're able to access a blueprint of their school, and they will note down where they feel uncomfortable or unsafe in red, where they feel uncomfortable or like there's tension in yellow, and where they feel comfortable, safe, and ready to learn in green. And then for each area of the school, they provide a little blurb of what is happening in this area of my school and what do I think would make it better. And then the trends from all the students answering, or whatever subsection of the students answered, is compiled into trends and offered to leadership of the school as like, this is what the students are seeing, they're experiencing on a like in a spatial way, and then what did they think would make it better? Because we as adults think that we have lots of ideas, we have lots of ways of addressing issues that we think are going to work, but this is asking students, what do you think would really work in the situation? So this is an amazing program. It's based off of a program called Shifting Boundaries that has a lot of evidence behind it. It has been running for many years, but was on paper. So students were like using crayons and markers, and it took a long time to compile all of our data. And so what OSPI has done is developed a digital version, and they are actually looking for schools to pilot running the digital hotspot mapping, I think around springtime, and they're able to provide technical support around that. So this is an amazing, very timely opportunity. If you're interested, I have the QR code here that tells you more and also gives you the information for how to reach out to OSPI. And, it's a free program. So I am definitely tooting their horn, but just because I think it's an amazing and effective way of addressing violence in our schools. Okay. So that was a lot going through the protective environmental protections. So my questions for you are, what initiatives inspired you? Which ones help address current issues that you're experiencing at your school? And who might be a good teammate to brainstorm with? Because we can't do it alone. We're gonna just take 2 minutes. have a little bit of a mini break, write down a reflection and our planning, and then we'll move forward again. Okay, if you are done with your planning, I'm going to send us out on a break. I'm going to ask us to be back at 10:25. Because we're about to jump into our last portion. It's going to involve our case studies, and I want us to be fresh and ready. So take a break, take care of yourself, have some water, turn off your camera, and I will see you back at 10:25 to resume. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you are comfortable. You have some water or something to drink with you. And we're doing so good. We've got through a lot and we're on to our last section. It is a big boy. It's a big section. Um, but it's also going to have our case studies in it. So that will be a fun opportunity to work through some of the things that we learn and get some technical or get some experience. So, I missed a lot in the chat while I was going along, and I just wanted to say there's a couple of things that people brought up. Definitely some interest in athletes as leaders programs. Um, so Erin put some information there. It's also linked at the end, as well as someone was saying that Whatcom Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services has a wonderful preventionist who's working with their schools, as well as Whatcom Pregnancy Clinic offers what's called the Relate program to schools. I don't know too much about it, but it sounds like it's worth looking into. So as we go along, please feel free to unmute yourself and share if there's something that's timely that you think would be valuable to the whole group. And you can also put it in the chat, and I'll just ask Erin to jump in if there's anything from the chat that I am missing. I just have it close so I don't, get too distracted. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts and your ideas. Okay, so we're going into our last section, supporting victims and survivors to lessen harms. If you were a scared teen confiding in an adult, what would you hope for? You don't have to answer it. If you'd like, you can put your answer in the chat. Um, but just think about it for yourself. If you were a scared teen and confiding in an adult, what would you hope for? That they would listen and not judge. Absolutely. Calm. I think I would want someone to receive what I was saying with warmth and kind of help me sit with it. Aram says responding with care. Yeah. To know what they will do with the information. That would be good to know. Yeah. Is this a confidential conversation or is this going to go somewhere? And knowing that ahead of time so they can make an informed decision. Providing clarity about what happens next. Yeah. I'll keep my eye on that chat as we go forward, in case there's any other ideas. So there was I'll talk a little bit more in depth about it in a little bit, but OSPI subcontracted an organization who went through and created a report for the legislature on um, sexual assault response and disclosures within K-12 schools and the way that the students, experienced going through that. So it was current students and past students, and there were 70 of them. Most of them were still current students around high school age. And this is, a big takeaway of what these students shared that they wanted. They wanted compassion instead of a procedural response. They wanted to be believed and taken seriously. They wanted confidentiality from peers, school staff, and family to protect their safety. And they wanted choice. Out of 70 students, 0 wanted a report to a social services maid or to a criminal investigation. And so they're having, a lot of conversation about our current mandatory reporting, procedures, as it seems it's not serving teenagers, and their suggestion put forward that mandatory reporting remain the same until the age of 13, and after the age of 13 that students are given the choice whether they would like a report made to law enforcement or social services, but knowing that what we're currently doing, although well intended, is scaring students out of making a report and not increasing their safety, which is of course the intention of mandatory reporting. So we'll talk more about how to, how to be a mandatory reporter and be providing choice a little bit later. But when we have an initial disclosure of sexual violence, this is what's encouraged to do. And this is stolen from not stolen, with permission, um, taken from our sexual assault response training that's happening February 27th. 8:30 to 11:30 in Anacortes at the ESD. So this is just really briefly skimming the surface of some of the things they're going to be talking about. Erin put the link for this training in the chat, and it's an amazing collaboration between detectives, forensic interviewers, sexual assault advocates, and the prosecutor on how to be receiving disclosures of sexual violence and how we're handling it in a victim-centered way, and also in a way that is not going to mess with the integrity of an investigation. So this is what they're suggesting. Listen and remain calm, as the offender may be someone that the child cares about. Don't ask leading questions and do not ask about details from the incident. Obtain minimal facts to determine their immediate safety. So the questions that you are asking are just to gauge their immediate safety. Thanking the child for talking and sharing and reporting. So this is pretty procedural, It's put together by a detective. This is what they're asking for us to do. And of course, being warm and empathetic as we go through. So when it says reporting to Child Protective Services and or law enforcement, I have a little flow chart here to get a better understanding of when it's a report to like the ESD and it's like a Title IX internal investigation type thing, when reporting to Child Protective Services, and when we're reporting to law enforcement. Um, and this will kind of come up a little bit in the case studies that we talk about or that we talk through. So there's a disclosure reported. And the first question is there an immediate threat to safety of the victim child? So if yes, of course, law enforcement is a little bit more agile in responding than Child Protective Services. So if the answer is yes, there is safe threat of safety to the child, the report's going to go to law enforcement. Was the incident offender over the age of 12? If the answer is no, this was another, child like under the age of 12, then the report does not need to be made to law enforcement, but there could be a possible law enforcement response considering public safety needs, and we would definitely want to report it to the safety center at the ESD. If the offender was over the age of 12, then we're going into a criminal investigation under the Children's Advocacy Center model. So that's where we have a forensic interviewer who is not law enforcement, this really wonderful, warm woman, and she has a conversation and tries to like just interview the child in a really trauma-informed way and a way that is, going to be helpful to the investigation and also going to be a positive experience to the best of our ability for the child. So that will be the sort of where that criminal investigation gets picked up. After law enforcement, like after it's been reported to law enforcement, that's what happens there. Going back to the beginning, if there is not immediate safety threat to the child, then it can be made to Child Protective Services, that mandatory report. And then was the incident occurring at the victim's home? If yes, then it goes under that criminal investigation again. And if not, then a Child Protective Services response is not needed. But we would still want to have that conversation with the ESD about safety and response, like at the school and district and, the ESD level. Okay. So this is not my area of expertise, as you can probably tell. So please sign up for that sexual assault response training. If you're interested in learning more and getting a lot better versed at addressing responses, because what we don't want is for not knowing and fear and uncertainty to make a disclosure from a child an uncomfortable, scary, unknown experience. And something else that I would very much encourage is you can always ask us youth, would you like an advocate available? And youth probably wouldn't know what that means, but what it means is you can give us a call if we have the capacity or your local agency has the capacity, they may be able to send out a sexual assault advocate. And our job is to be the voice of the student, to understand their needs, to safety plan, to provide empowerment and support and protect their rights to the best of our ability and make it like a more compassionate experience and kind of take away some of that. I don't know what's going to happen next, or I don't feel like I'm being listened to because I don't want it to be reported to law enforcement. And it is being reported to law enforcement. We can kind of just, be a support person for that student. So that's something that you can offer as well. Okay, so we have stepping away from that initial response that gets triggered. These are just some suggestions that have come out of our research. This comes from 100 school districts, I believe, and there's a couple other technical packages that are linked in the references for how can we be supporting victims better. So don't discipline if the student was under the influence when they were when the incident occurred. Don't discipline false accusations. Don't discipline if the student was engaging in reasonable self-defense, if they were acting out due to trauma, if they are publicly talking about their experiences, and if they're missing class in the aftermath of what they experienced. So, just taking it on a case by case basis, and maybe things that we would normally discipline for, we're not going to, in order to have that student feel like they're being supported by the school. Protect from retaliation. So try and protect students from victim blaming, really shut that down, encourage staff to shut that down if they're hearing that happening. Minimize, protect from minimization and denial. So believing them, like we're saying, really doing some investigation, and protecting to the best of our ability that student from threats and from revenge. And all of this is really, really important to keep in mind when we know that abusers target least protected youth, knowing that they may not be believed, that they're already seen as problem children, that they don't have people who are already protecting them, that they have, already strained the patience of staff, or they have made, just they students who are making accusations of sexual violence or reporting sexual violence, the likelihood of it being untrue is extremely low. And so we do want to take every single report as very serious and, protect that student to the best of our ability, no matter who the student is, no matter what kind of, experiences we've had with that student in the past. And um, having it, be as warm, welcoming, positive of a disclosure experience as possible. So a couple of supportive measures that we can provide to students are creating safety plans to keep the harasser away from the victim during classes, in the hallways, during break, school activities, and on the way to and from schools. And as a reminder, we're trying to keep the harasser away from the victim and not the other way around, because it's otherwise a little victim blamey, right? Putting the onus on the victim. Providing supportive measures, even if they're still investigating the harassment, including counseling, tutoring, excused absences, extra time for homework or tests, chances to redo homework or retake a test as needed. So just providing supportive measures to a student who has made a disclosure, whether or not, regardless of what the investigation has found, knowing that the student is, going through a hard time one way or another. Conducting fair and timely investigations. So this, is going to fall pretty heavily on your Title IX coordinator. But investigating all reports of sexual violence right away, that means reporting them to the Title IX compliance officer right away. Certainly, parties have equal rights to participate in the investigation, and both sides should be informed of the conclusion of the investigation. Even if it's not a Title IX issue, even if it's harassment or something like that, it can be really helpful to build trust with students, and build that belief in the effectiveness of our policy if we continue to keep students informed on what's happening with their complaint, even if the decision is not, what they want to hear. At least they know, and they're not left in this, well, I said something and no one did anything. That's not how we want our students to be feeling, because then they will stop reporting. So, we can let students know, okay, we investigated, we couldn't find anything, we couldn't do anything about it. We can still provide some supportive measures to you, but at least they know what's going on and they believe that they're being taken seriously. If appropriate, offer a restorative process. So this is something that would not be appropriate if it's at the CPS or law enforcement level. This is something that would only be appropriate if, it's youth on youth, and if it's something that's like relatively low level. I don't want to echelon sexual violence, of course, but restorative processes can be extremely helpful to the whole school environment. They have, of course, roots in Indigenous culture, and it starts with acknowledging that the harm has occurred by the perpetrator, centering the victim's needs, and creating a plan for the wrongdoer to repair the harm they caused. I have a school that I go to, and I have been very curious what students, teachers, and counselors think is the root causes of their healthy school culture and joyful, respectful, community that they have built. And restorative process is one of the things that was mentioned again and again, that several years ago, leadership took on building restorative processes into their, response and, their everyday response to conflict within their school. And it has extremely positively benefited the whole school and the community and the experience of safety at the school. So I'm not an expert on restorative justice. On the right here, I have linked a guide to implementing restorative justice in schools if you want to do a little bit more research into that. So a restorative process may involve an adequate apology, changed behavior, restitution, and accountability. And when done right, restorative processes can make the victims of sexual harm feel safe and respected, and students who cause sexual harm achieve better learning outcomes. So having a restorative process for non-sexual, incidents, is something that can also be a protective factor for sexual violence, is because we're remembering that sexual violence and non-sexual violence, protective factors and risk factors are connected. So even if we want to stay away from a restorative process for like sexual violence and just kind of leave that up to the current policies we have in place, if we're open to it, we can start looking into increasing our restorative processes for non-sexual like incidents like harassment, bullying, violence, those kinds of things, and see how that goes. Okay, so these are the suggestions made by that sexual assault response for K-12 schools done by that was that OSPI report, excuse me. So what the first suggestion was staff training on receiving disclosures, of course, policies updated with survivor input. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, both of those. Having knowledge on the reporting process, so giving students the knowledge on the reporting process, including how, to whom, what will happen, and the effect it will have on the perpetrator. Because that's one of the really big concerns a lot of victims have, is that their perpetrator is someone that they don't want to ruin their life. They recognize that their perpetrator did something that hurt them. However, it's still a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a parent, a teacher, someone that they care about in some way. And they're worried that their disclosure is going to ruin this person's life, and that, knowing what might happen within this investigation can help them make that informed decision. So when I asked at the very beginning of this module, what would you hope for if you were a scared teen making a disclosure? This is something that they want to know. So this knowledge could be disseminated at biannual assembly. That was one of the recommendations made by those 70 students. In addition, it could also be shared by teachers on the district's website and in handouts, both in the office and in bathrooms, so students can take them confidentially. So kind of just like spreading this information far and wide so that it increases the likelihood of students learning about it. So having it on written, handouts, but then also having it verbally shared with students who, their written word just sort of blurs into the background for them. Those are some of the suggestions for how to give them more choice when our current mandatory reporting system is still in place and has not been changed with survivor input at this time. They also requested sexual violence prevention, including education on healthy and unhealthy relationships, and maximizing transparency and choice while abiding by mandatory reporting law. So a couple of things you could say are, what you tell me I may have to share with law enforcement so that they know, or would you like an advocate available? And I already kind of touched upon that. So giving them some information, some choice. I often tell students that they can call our hotline and remain anonymous and receive advocacy services without a mandatory report, coming into effect. If we don't know them, we don't know where they are, who, their name, anything like that, then we're not really going to be able to make a mandatory report, and they can still access advocacy. We can help answer questions like, what might happen if I were to report this? Or I don't want to report this, but I don't feel safe, and we can safety plan with them. So that's an option as well. If you believe that a student has something going on, and you can tell that they're not ready to share with someone who may be a mandatory reporter. Okay, so we have a couple of case studies. I'm going to stop screen sharing because Aram is going to go through our case studies with us, and we are going to work through them together based on everything we just learned. This is an opportunity to just put on our problem-solving hats and work through it. This is not a test, so we're just going to do our best and see how we can kind of sync some of our learning and our knowledge that we maybe already have into a real life situation, so that when a real life situation walks through our door, that we're a little bit more prepared. So, Aram, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Give me 1 second and okay, can you all see that screen? The purple? Yep, perfect. Okay. So here's the first case scenario. And and so sorry, let me get my So we have to remember, as we're looking at this scenario is designed to help educators like yourself practice what to do procedurally when a student discloses sexual abuse by discloses sexual abuse. So the focus is on role clarity, mandatory reporting, and appropriate school actions, not investigation or counseling. So I'm helping you along here a little bit. And the scenario is Maria is a ninth grade student at a Washington public high school. Near the end of the school day, she asks her teacher if they can talk privately. Once in a quiet space, Maria shares that another student sexually assaulted her at a weekend gathering off campus. Maria says that she has been afraid to come to school and is worried about running into the student in the hallway. She asks the teacher not to tell anyone because she does not want her parents to know and is scared of retaliation. So you are the staff member receiving this disclosure. And so as a group, if we can, I think there's, sorry, how many of us? There's about 12 of us. So I just thought we could stay together as a group. And you don't have to come offline if you don't feel comfortable, but feel free to share in the chat. What are the first 2 to 3 things that you should do or say at this moment? Think about the things that Bryn we were talking about, how you would want people to respond. So what are the first 2 to 3 things that you should say or do at this moment that Maria is sharing this information with you? And we'll start with that question first. Just as a prompt, remember that you can thank the student for sharing. Um, you can acknowledge their courage and validate their feelings. Important to make them feel safe, calm, supported. Using supportive language. Okay, I'll keep going. Um, what about confidentiality? How do you explain the limits of your confidentiality in a trauma-informed way? And this can be tricky. Many of us have been in situations where students have shared information and we know what our requirements are as mandatory reporters. So how do you share in a trauma-informed way what your procedures are? I had a student share um, an assault, and it was one that I did not expect. I don't think we expect any, but even though we know what we're supposed to say in the moment, it just catches you and you freeze. So Karen shared, what you tell me, I may have to share with law enforcement. Thank you. I told the student, I'm glad you shared with me. I want to help keep you safe, but I can't keep this completely private. And I will only share this with people who need to know to help support you. And at first, she was very upset and shared, why do you have to tell anybody at all? I'm coming to you in confidentiality. And then I had to remind her that my job in keeping her safe is to report to the proper authorities certain things. And once she was clear and where I stood, it was her decision if she wanted to share more or not. But it's important that we be straightforward and upfront and transparent. And then my last question are what responses or actions should be avoided? Um, for example, is it smart to say asking for, well, what proof or evidence? People ask for ridiculous things like this, and um, it doesn't make the kid feel safe to share anything anymore because you're not believing what I have to say. Focus on safety. We should only ask what is necessary to assess immediate safety at school because this is related to somebody at school, and avoid details about the incident itself when you're asking questions. There are many, many other protective factors that can go into place, but right now we're focusing on what's happening at school. So what about what is your obligation in a school setting? Like what obligations are triggered at this point for you? And what does the school need to do right away, even though this incident happened off campus? This is a hard one because this didn't happen at school. It happened off campus. But Maria, as I said, she discloses her sexual assault because it happened by another student at her school. And this will trigger a few obligations. So we have, if possible, if possible and appropriate, give the student choices about who and how information is provided. Would they like to be present? Thank you. What policies or people in school would you have to contact regarding a sexual misconduct/assault? A mandated reporter is not defined by location. So some primary obligations by schools are to report to law enforcement, Title IX coordinator. We have evidence of a hostile environment at school. Perfect. District, what other obligations might you have to start at school? Think about your district policies and obligations, your sexual harassment, sexual assault, your WASDA policies are activated at this point. You are contacting your Title IX coordinator. You are contacting law enforcement when appropriate. Parent guardian notification would be required unless risk to safety. I mean, what happens when a student says, no, 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 don't tell my parent. I don't want my parent to know. This is a really sticky situation and it happens often, kids. And as Bryn had mentioned, that study, that I was a little floored by that study also, that students were not happy with staff reporting and wanted that choice that they would decide who would find out about their assault. So some key factors to think about, obligation is triggered by knowledge, not by location, severity, or whether the student wants action. We have to report. It's not our job to investigate, but we are required to report. What are some things that the school needs to do right away, even though the incident happened off campus? We talked about notifying appropriate school leadership, initiating a Title IX response, and then addressing safety concerns. Because what is the concern of the student? What did she say? She's scared of retaliation, and the student goes to her school. So what are some things that we can do for this student? Thinking about schedule adjustments, safe passage plans, no contact supports, counseling access, and then also referring to the many different types of organizations that are outside of school that can support. It's really hard not to get too involved because as educators, we want to help and save and all of these things for our students, but we have to remember that some sexual assault needs to be investigated, and we may not be the right people to investigate. And we're not there to determine discipline on the perpetrator. We have to first follow the proper channels to find out what happened, and don't promise outcomes. That's the biggest mistake that we can do to a student, is to promise outcomes to a victim of sexual assault. So we have to remember that off-campus location does not remove the school's responsibility to act when when school access or safety is affected. Um, so any other questions or responses to this scenario? Implement supportive measures. Yep. It's honestly so painful not to be able to honor all of the wishes and needs of the students, implementing safety measures for sure. Um, and I think it's a very trepidous conversation that we have, because you find yourself walking over your words, but it's because we're trying to be careful in those moments and say the right thing. And I don't think it's a harmful thing to have these things scripted or have practiced them. I've had bullet points and scripted notes for myself, from school officials and from lawyers when we have had incidences of sexual assault. Number one, to protect the student and protect the school. So I don't think it's a bad idea to kind of bullet out what you should say and what you shouldn't say. So again, your role is to listen and respond with care, explain limits of confidentiality, report promptly according to your policy, and document per procedure. And I think the biggest thing that I've recognized with the sexual assault professional developments that we've been doing for the last couple months, we need to know what our policy is. A lot of people just don't know what their policy and where it's at. And so, our role is not to investigate or collect details. It's not to decide whether the report is serious enough. It's not to determine next steps beyond reporting or to keep the information secret. It's a heavy load that we're carrying, but it's a responsibility that we chose to accept when we decided to become educators and work in schools. So that's the first case scenario. Bryn, should I go on with the second, or did you have something else?
I just wanted to mention that even if the investigation, you know, as when we turn over our information to the appropriate reporting agency, we can still be a listening ear, for a student or supportive. I get that we are no longer the person who's handling what was shared with, what they shared with us, but we are still the first person or the person that they shared with. And we can continue to be a supportive person, as long as, they'll still have us and trust wasn't eroded during the reporting process, to just continue to let that student know, I'm still here to provide support and help you kind of get through your days at school as you're here, that kind of thing. Even if you're not able to do much to change what has occurred regarding the report, you can still be a supportive person. And then Laura said it's important to note that the Title IX investigation has to continue even if law enforcement or CPS is investigating, unless we have been ordered to cease the Title IX process temporarily. Thank you for that. Okay, Aram, yeah, you're welcome to go to scenario number 2.
Okay, here is scenario number 2. This is, I'm sorry, I can't spell, student from parent. So, Aaliyah is a 7th grade student at a Washington Public Middle School, and over the past few weeks, her counselor has noticed changes in her behavior, increased anxiety, frequent absences, and declining grades. During a private check-in at school, Aaliyah discloses that she's been sexually assaulted by her parent at home. She appears scared and asks the counselor not to tell anyone because she is afraid of being separated from her siblings and worried about what will happen if her parent finds out. Again, you are the staff member receiving this disclosure. So, same questions here. What policy and laws are triggered? What must happen immediately? And who is responsible for each action. Um, as we discussed with the other scenario, state law requires mandatory reporting of child abuse and neglect. Sexual abuse by a parent meets the definition of child abuse and must be reported. So at school, do we even know how to dial CPS? What the phone number is? How to look it up? I was stumped. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know that some people call it something else. How is this information readily available for school staff? Um, do you call law enforcement? Do you call CPS first? Do you tell your administrator? All of a sudden, all of these ifs come up. Who am I supposed to contact? Um, we have to remember that this is not a Title IX investigation, because it's an investigation of a parent, but it still may apply to school-based like supportive measures and but the abuse itself is going to be handled through the CPS and law enforcement. But this student has confided in you, and so it will be up to the school to provide some safety measures. So my question is to you, what must happen immediately? As a staff member receiving this disclosure, what are the first 2 to 3 actions required by policy and law? I kind of gave the answers away, but do you have documentation policies at your school that you're required to do? Some people don't like to do that because those can be subpoenaed or misunderstood. So in my scenario, I called CPS and but that was not from a parent. But it had happened with somebody outside of the school grounds. And that was not a student at school, so I did have to call CPS and law enforcement. And one of the mistakes that I made was I did not ask for any kind of a case number or any kind of proof that my case was was written down or documented in any way. And so, what are the procedures that you're supposed to ask for? I didn't know that I needed to ask for a case number. And that was a mistake that I made, so that when the student in this scenario uh, wanted to recant her statement and went to the police, there was no evidence of her her case. And so, anyways, that's another whole topic. But for this case, if you are reporting, are you getting the proper information, the case number? And then what kind of school-based safety supports are you going to put in place for this student? We know that from the scenario that she is having increased anxiety, frequent absences, and declining grades. And so, how much information do you share with your staff and your teachers at school, and what supportive roles do they need to have with this student's care? Thinking about again, addressing the student. They're coming to you. We talked about this with Bryn, like thanking the student for telling you, acknowledging her fear, her anxiety, her concern, maintaining a supportive tone. And as Bryn mentioned, being there because she may be referred to other people, but how can you keep supporting this person? And then in this specific case, explaining that mandatory reporting has to happen. You have to be honest, direct, and clear about this. And sometimes some people allow you to be present in the reporting. Students may ask you to be there. I was asked to be there when the student was reporting to law enforcement. And so I just had to think about, like, I know it seems silly, but how was I going to sit my responses? I didn't want to interrupt the student, but I wanted to be there, and she wanted me to be there and hold her hand. And so I was there for her in that way. So what about in this case, do we report to your administrator, your principal? What are your district's reporting procedures with this type of a scenario? I'm going to open that up because we have policies, but districts have different requirements of their schools. Some districts ask if you're going to call CPS and law enforcement for outside, I want to know as a principal. Some are like, no, you are a mandatory reporter. Go ahead and do what you have to do. You can tell me after. So, how do you explain all of this to a student who has just revealed such a difficult um, thing that's happened in her life? I'm really glad you told me. When you're describing, what you're describing is serious and not your fault. I can't keep this private because my job is to help and protect you. I will need to share this with people whose role is to keep you safe, and we will take this one step at a time. Remember that you're not there again to investigate or ask detailed questions. Contact the parent or caregiver, make promises, or ask or share that this is what's going to happen, outcomes. You shouldn't delay reporting to get more information. And I think this was a really hard one for me, because what I was told was at the end of the day on a Friday night, at the end of the school day, and I knew I had to report right away, but I hesitated for 30 seconds because I didn't know if a Friday night having a kid go back home was the right time. But I got clear counseling and I did what I had to do. Um, you know, should you be sharing this information with other colleagues? We know information goes through a school very quickly, but how do we protect this type of information? And how do we attempt to manage like the safety dimensions of this? Because, for example, for me, it was a Friday. What if it is a Friday for you and you know this student is going back to this parent that's done this to this student? So, in summary, we should think about we're not here to determine the truth. We're here to help the student with the next steps and guide them and be supportive and be there for them. You should follow established procedures, protect the student, report immediately, listen, and move forward with the next steps. Our policy requires us to fill out a form. We are required to inform admin. Thank you for sharing. School counselors and admin knowing procedures around CPS interviews at school is also really important. And when a counselor gets a request for information from CPS, knowing when they can disclose versus when they need an ROI. Thank you. Thank you, Laura, for sharing. I've been, this was supposed to be a group discussion, but it's very quiet, so I don't want to force you to talk. But is there anything else you want to share about situations that you've been in that would benefit the group in any way? We've all had our experiences, and each one is different. They're never the same. And is there any one prescribed way to do anything? No, but the best thing that you can do is follow your procedure because that's going to protect yourself, your school, and the student.
Just think
I will-
too, I would get called a lot about consulting like CPS is here or making mandatory reports, and just like obviously there's the urgency to make the report within for school staff 48 hours. So there's this like sense of urgency, but then when CPS comes maybe asking for information or to interview, they're it's okay to pause for a second and like make phone calls or ask questions before you just, because it feels like there's this like urgency, like I have to do it a certain way, and but there's a lot of nuance to, like, of course CPS can come and investigate, but then you're stuck with, do the parents know that, and is there like our school's normal practice, right, would be like to call home when in certain cases, and we know obviously there's like if they're investigating the family, you would not do that, but you really need to be told not to do that in just some like those nuances, and that it's okay to like not hurry in that moment right then.
Absolutely. And also I think what baffled me was the questions that they asked or lack of questions that they asked. I wasn't sure what was going to be asked. And so I think that would also be a good opportunity to reach out to CPS and be like, what are you going to ask of our students? Because I remember they asked for some identifying information, and I wasn't sure if I should give it or not at the time, and I was confused and I hesitated, and I don't know why. I was scared and terrified as I was doing this call, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And I think, again, that was the reason I hesitated, because it was not the first time I had to make a call, but just the approach was a little difficult in the questioning. Bryn, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you, Laura, for sharing.
Thank you, Erin, for running those case scenarios. And if you feel like you could use some more practice, a better understanding, or just more exposure to the whole conversation around sexual violence disclosure, um, we have a training for that coming up later this month. And so there is an opportunity to get more understanding because as I said, hopefully we only have to go through this experience and make a mandatory report or receive disclosures, never or very few times. And when it happens, my hope is that we have the information and the knowledge to have, like Laura was saying, sort of, the space and the time to give to that student and clarity to give to that student and choice to give to that student, to the best of our ability, so that they are not experiencing instability from the people that they're looking to for support and reassurance. Okay, so we just have a little bit more before we wrap up our training today. So this is coming from our Supporting Survivors of Sexual Assault in K-12 Schools report that I mentioned, from OSPI. Oh, excuse me. Going backwards. So as suggested by students, we should be getting training, so receiving student disclosures of sexual violence, and that should be for all staff. That's what's suggested, because even though most often counselors and administration are the ones handling it, in reality, students are disclosing to school resource officers and to teachers and to support staff because they're reporting to whomever they have built a relationship with, and that can be anyone. So, encouraging our school to have reporting training for all staff. And then bystander intervention into employee sexual abuse is recommended for all elementary school staff. There's a lot less, experiences of disclosure coming at the level of elementary. So bystander intervention is sort of is suggested for those younger ages of like, what are we noticing happening? Aram just gave an amazing training on employee sexual abuse, and that may become a reoccurring training. And then recommended is administrators supporting survivors, being a support person, technology assisted sexual violence, state specific requirements, family educational rights. Oh, sorry. I have this little bar here that keeps getting in my way. And informal resolution procedures, so for Title IX coordinators, so that restorative process. That's sort of the theme there. So supporting survivors of sexual assault in K-12 schools has also put together in that report a sexual harassment model protocol with updates from victims and survivors. So this protocol is the model that we use for sexual harassment in 90% of schools in our district. The model policy is number 3205P. So this has been adopted as a model policy for sexual harassment for most of our schools, most likely your school. And OSPI has updated it with survivor input. So as you can see here, they have made changes on the verbiage so that students can understand the harassment policy a lot better. And we're taking out some of that jargon as well as a few other changes. So if you would like the link to that report is here on the screen. It's also at the end of our slides today if you would like a clickable link. And as a part of that, they have the model protocol updated. So you can take a look through that. And that can be a part of the discussion of the school support team when they're discussing updating their sexual harassment policy. So now we have just 2 slides on like more specific types of sexual violence. So this one is support for victims of sex trafficking. So in addition to everything we've already talked about, here's just a little bit of support around more specific ones. So sex trafficking against children is called commercial sexual exploitation of children. And I have a little QR code here for how to talk to youth about human trafficking and involve sex trafficking as well as other forms of trafficking. And that's really helpful if you're not super familiar with trafficking in general, because most youth are not going to ever identify themselves as a victim of trafficking. And what we might be hearing are red flags around exchanging, a place to stay or implicit expectations around sexual favors or like, sexual actions to get something like safety or resources or things that this youth need. It could very well, in their mind, be like in a boyfriend who's not treating them right. So definitely take a look at that guide for how to talk to youth about human trafficking if you're not super familiar with it. So that you can kind of hear a little bit of, oh, this goes beyond an unhealthy relationship into another realm. And then the resource, of course, we will be a resource as well as, your local sexual assault or domestic violence agency. We can be a resource. And then Homeland Security also is a really big resource for victims of sex trafficking. The services that they can receive include victim advocacy, housing support, legal support, health and mental health care. And some of their policies that I want you to know to just maybe assuage some of your concerns are that one, students only have to report as much as they are willing to. They're not going to be pressured to report what they're not comfortable reporting. Two, they will not be arrested. They have a bad history of arresting victims, and they have changed their policies, so they will not arrest the victim. And they do not regard citizenship status. So even though Homeland Security is involved in a lot of really scary stuff, regarding immigration and currently incarceration, deportation, that is not a part of the sex trafficking, support world. So they're not going to ask, they're not going to regard. It should not put our students in more danger. That is what I've been told by our Homeland Security officers who do that sex trafficking support. And if you want to know more, one, the tip line is here on the screen. And then two, that when we were talking about teaching skills for sexual violence or for healthy relationships, and I talked about Homeland Security providing online safety training. That contact information, is a line that you can also be asking some questions about what support for victims of sex trafficking could look like. So, it's kind of a, a good contact as well. Okay. And then second, more specific form of sexual violence is digital sexual abuse. So a really big support here and connection here is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. You can make a report either online or over the phone. I have their tip line as well as their online reporting mechanism here. You can report anonymously. Reports will be sent to law enforcement. So this, is helpful in protecting youth and responding to online sexual abuse. In addition, to taking whatever we feel is necessary in terms of making a report. And then I also have included this poster here that I very much encourage you to put up around your office or around your school, because students are told if they send a naked picture of themselves or compromising video, or personal video of themselves, and something bad happens, like it gets out of their hands, it is their fault for sending it, and it can never go away. Like whatever we put online lives forever. And that can be extremely disturbing to students who have been exploited or who have had their privacy, their confidentiality, their photos kind of spread around against their will. So there is, as a part of the Missing and Exploited Children Network, they have created this program called Take It Down. It says, here's how it works. Answer a few simple questions, select the image or video on your device that you're concerned about, take it down, we'll assign a unique digital fingerprint called a hash value to the image or video. The hash will be shared with participating online platforms such as, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. They work with a lot of the big apps, and it can be used to detect copies of these images or videos on their services and take action, to remove the content or limit the spread. This all happens without the image or video ever leaving your device or anyone viewing it, and you do not have to share any personal information. So this can be really helpful. It's not going to solve all our issues. Of course, people can still screenshot, and that can be challenging, but this is a step that students can take if they know that there's a picture out there or a video out there of them that they do not want spread around and is being spread around. So if you would like, you can share that with your student body, putting it up, putting it in your office so that students can know about it. And I just want to take this moment to remind us of, we can be a protective factor when students are going through something really hard. I know when we were talking about reporting, how it can be so painful to not only witness and support a student going through something hard, but knowing that our current, systems for receiving disclosures and responding to disclosures can be really scary and challenging for students, and not always what they want. And so just a gentle reminder that the way you are and who you are in your role and who you are to these students can help buffer and lessen the harm that they experience. So being a trusted mentor and offering fairly administered rules and routines. So just, reminding them that like this is what you can expect from us, and being a consistent person in their life can be really, really powerful for students. Okay. I'm gonna move through this one again since I think that we're probably taking notes as we go. And we have reached the end. So I wanted to just, go back to our chat and see how we're doing there. And if anyone wants to come off of mute, you're welcome to. If you have any questions at this time or anything that we would like to discuss.
And I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. So if anyone would like to ask a question, that will not be recorded. So.